So far in the Clifton Branham Memoir, we have seen the happy years between himself and his wife Nancy and the birth of their children. How a tragic event led to a huge personality change with Clifton, and he turned to a life of crime, leaving his wife and children behind him. We saw how Rance Smallwood was shot by Clifton for the crime of killing Clell Adams, and how Clifton would spend the next few years on the run until he returned with his brother-in-law, Granville Cox, from Tazewell County, Virginia. Dark clouds were about to gather around Clifton as he would go to jail for the murder of Henry Vanover, and a series of events would lead to the death of his wife Nancy, a remarriage, and the death of a man named Moore. How he would go to trial and would be sentenced to death over the crime of his wife's murder. Once again, we do give the reminder that during the time that Clifton Branham wrote his memoirs, Cumberland Mountain was Pine Mountain on the Virginia-Kentucky border. The mountain's name would change shortly afterward in history. Again, please remember that this is the memoir of Clifton Branham and must be taken with a grain of salt. These events are retold from his perspective. All aboard the Kentucky-Tennessee Living Time Machine! Please fasten your seatbelts and keep your arms and legs inside of the vehicle at all times. But to get going, we need your help. We still need to fire up the time machine to transport us. Please help us by clicking on the like, subscribe, and bell notification buttons down below. Not only does this fire up the time machine, but it convinces YouTube that we need a bigger time machine to reach more people who love history as much as you do. Now, back to our story. Death of Henry Vanover. Clifton Branham had been living with his wife Nancy for the past couple of months on the property that was located at Cumberland Mountain. They were living together happily, and there did not seem to be any issues between the two of them. On Saturday, June 18, 1887, Henry Vanover was ambushed in his garden. Please see our article or video on the Henry Vanover story, Killing Rock, The Untold Tales, Part 2, for more information about the life and death of Henry. Also, see our story article or video on Clifton Branham, Killing Rock, The Untold Story, Part 5, for more information about Clifton's role in this murder and his time in the pen. Returning to the Clifton Branham Memoir. Clifton Branham claims that it was proven at his trial that he was at home with his wife when the shooting of Henry Vanover occurred. The next morning, a brother of Vanover's came to the property that Branham was staying at on his way to West Virginia. He asked Clifton to go with him on his journey. Clifton went as far as Clintwood in Dickinson County, Virginia, with him. Branham then left Vanover's company and continued on to Johnson County, Kentucky. While staying with one of his uncles on Tom's Creek, 3 men came and arrested him for the murder of Henry Vanover. They took him to the Letcher County Jail in Whitesburg, Kentucky to stand trial. Clifton's brother, Tandy, was also brought to the jail on some charge. Both men had their examining trial, was bound over, and sent to the Pike County Jail in Pikeville, Kentucky. After the trial, Clifton was found guilty and got a life sentence in the Kentucky State Prison at Frankfort. Time in the Kentucky State Prison at Frankfort. During Branham's incarceration at the Kentucky State Prison, he went to the library and got a Bible to read. He joined the Sunday school class, and he then joined the Royal Christian Brotherhood. He said he was happily converted, and he would pray in public, began preaching, and for the next 13 years continued with this work twice a day. He said that God had blessed him with this work. A new Kentucky law had passed in which everyone who had been incarcerated could be paroled after 10 years. After Clifton had been in prison for 14 years and 7 months, the deputy warden, Clifton, and his brother-in-law, William J. Fleming, all worked together for his release. The work paid off, and he was given parole and released. After giving his farewells, Branham boarded a train and went to Old Virginia. Home at last. On arriving at Norton, Virginia, Branham was met at the train station by his nephew, David Boggs. He went with Boggs to his house and stayed a week with him. This is how Branham describes that week. Quote, While here surrounded with different environments and enchanting hills, I went up unto the mountains to pour out my soul to God in prayer. And oh, did I feel that if I had wings, I would flit away through the ethereal blue to brighter mansions beyond the skies. Unquote. Branham then received a phone message from Mr. Fleming, who had come to Coburn for him. He took the first train to Coburn to meet up with his nephew, who was there with horses to ride. They mounted the horses and rode to Dickinson County, arriving at William J. Fleming's home just after nightfall. They spent the remainder of the night and the next day talking and rejoicing together with friends over the release of Clifton. The next day William J. Fleming and his wife with Clifton rode to Pound, Virginia. On the way they stopped at John Branham's home, and there Clifton saw his mother, and they had a happy reunion of hugging and kissing each other, and they cried for joy at the reunion. They continued on with their journey to Webb Branham's home, and after greetings, Clifton played the organ, and they sang songs together and had a great time. Branham had sent for his wife and children to meet him there. Clifton's daughter Lizzie was the first to arrive. They hugged each other. Then Clifton recognized Nancy and shook her hand, and he asked the children to get her a chair. The two talked for a while. At some point Clifton walked outside with Webb Branham's daughter, who was also named Lizzie, and the two were talking. Nancy came out and joined the two in their conversation. It soon turned sour. This is a direct quote from his memoir. Quote, I went out to the lane and was talking, and my wife came out and joined in the conversation, and inadvertently she said, quote, let's go home, unquote. I said, home? I have no home. She said, yes, you do. I said to her, Nancy, look here, what a pretty daughter we have, and she looks just like a lamb that has been slain. And now I am just close to your house as I ever expect to be. Yet I am sorry such is the case, but you have drawn the line between us that can never be erased. You have helped to slay this child, and now I want you to let me take her and raise her feet out of the pit, into which you have gotten them. But if you should call on me for any accommodation, I should be glad to help you, and will never lay a straw in your way, if you will let me alone. Unquote. She denied nothing, and we parted just that way. About dark that night, Dave Fleming's wife came to Clifton telling him that, quote, Paul Dave is out in the end of the garden, out by the road, and he wants you to come out. He wants to see you, unquote. Clifton's sister and William J. Fleming both told him not to go, so he refused to meet with Dave. Dave and his party immediately left, and so Clifton said that he knew that something was up to no good at that point. Death of Nancy Branham. The next morning Clifton and his daughter Lizzie made a trip to Dickinson County, Virginia, to the grave of Mima to pay their respects. Clifton states while he was there in sad reflection, he had considered going back to live with his wife and forgiving her for everything. Never mind that he was the one that was moonshining, shooting people, went to prison, and taken up with other women as a single man named George Jones for years, but he's going to forgive her. All righty then. But after thinking upon this for some time, he refused to do so. The pair returned to Mr. Fleming's home, and he was invited to spend Christmas with some friends in Clintwood. But Clifton thought it was best to avoid trouble, as the parties were prone to drinking and drunken conduct. So instead, they went to Pound, Virginia. On the way, Dave Fleming overtook the traveling pair. Dave and Clifton had many difficulties before this point in their history. What follows is a word-for-word account of what Clifton wrote as to how Nancy Branham ended up being shot dead by him. Quote, I told him to go on, that I did not want to travel with him. He said, quote, no, I would not hurt you for $1,000, unquote. He said, quote, you know it would do you no good, you SOB. I then jobbed my gun in his face, and he struck me, and I shot at him. By this time my wife had come up and said, quote, "You have killed my child, you SOB, and I will have your neck broke for it." Unquote. She thought I had shot our daughter. Then she threw up my daughter to me. Then I fired the shot and I left her lifeless on the ground. Unquote. Then I left, crossing the mountain, going to my brother's on Shelby Creek. On reflecting over the matter, I wondered how my wife and daughter could rise up against me, and have me so soon cut off, and me to kill my wife. I never dreamed of such as ever happening. Unquote. After being on Shelby Creek for a short time, he traveled to Beaver in Floyd County, Kentucky to stay with his cousin John McCurry. From here, we will let Clifton tell you what happened next. Quote, I went to Beaver in Floyd County to my cousin John McCurry's, where I remained about 3 months. He had a daughter with whom I fell in love. Her father could not stay at home because of a feud between him and the Moore family living just below him. They had shot him, killed his property, burned his barns and fencing, and kicked up all kinds of deviltry, and swearing that they would take his life before they let up. But it came to pass that Anderson Moore got killed, and that broke up the next. His property was killed, his house and barn were burned. Haley and I got married and started to Michigan, taking a boat at the mouth of Big Mud. A drummer on the boat knew me. He got off at Prestonsburg and told them that we had gone down the river. The others took a skiff and followed us to White House, where they arrested me and brought me back to Prestonsburg jail. Then they took me to Lexington, where I remained 2 months, and the officers from Virginia came after me and brought me here to Wise County Jail to be tried for the murder of my wife. Unquote. Trial. During the July term of 1903, the Commonwealth of Virginia versus Clifton Branham commenced in the Wise County, Virginia court. Judge W. S. Matthews was presiding. Clifton's attorneys were Honorable R. P. Bruce, J. F. Alley, and J. A. Hughes. 12 men were selected for the jury, and after hearing the evidence, came back with a charge of guilty of murder in the first degree. Last confession, last request, hanging, funeral, and burial. The following is word-for-word confession of Clifton Branham. Quote, at the age of 14, I took deliberate aim and shot at Mrs. Fleming, and at another time I shot at John Fleming, intending to kill them for abusing my sister, but missed them. I beat another woman and threw her over a cliff, leaving her for dead, but she recovered. I premeditatedly shot to kill Rance Smallwood, but failed. I received part of the money that killed Henry Vanover. I killed my wife for accusing me of my daughter. I killed Anderson Moore and destroyed his property on Beaver. Last request as given by Clifton Branham. That my friends take me to Dickinson County for interment. Goodbye. Execution. Clifton Branham was led from Wise County Jail on September 25, 1903, and taken to the scaffold. He was the last man to be hanged in Wise County, Virginia. The funeral and burial. Branham's body was taken to Dickinson County by family members in a horse-drawn wagon. People came out all along the way to pay respects to Clifton's body as it passed by. Supposedly, Clifton said that he wanted a 3-day wake because he would rise again on the 3rd day from the dead. Everyone waited anxiously for him to rise on up on that 3rd day, but nothing happened. He was then laid to rest in an unmarked grave high on a knoll in the Branham family cemetery at the head of Pine Creek. So ends the memoir of Clifton Branham. Thank you. We at Kentucky, Tennessee Living would like to thank you for watching our video series on the Appalachian Outlaws. Don't forget to hit that like button, as the more likes we receive, the more likely YouTube is to suggest our videos to other viewers. Also, to receive notice when we upload a new video, be sure to subscribe and click the bell for notifications. We thank you for continuing to support Kentucky, Tennessee Living as we are discovering the mysteries of Appalachian history.